Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So welcome, everyone. I'm Sabrina Christobach. I'm part of the business development team at Air Liquide and the co-director of educational programming for the Women's Energy Network Houston chapter. I'll be your host for today's webinar and have the honor of introducing our speaker, Commissioner Lindley. On behalf of the WEN leadership team, we are so pleased that you are able to join us today for our discussion. These driven and talented women that you see on the screen make up our WEN Houston board. They lead the teams and programs that make WEN the powerhouse organization that it is today. As you may know, WEN is a not-for-profit organization. Therefore, we cannot exist without the support of our sponsors, as well as the ability to volunteer their time. So thank you to all of our volunteers for keeping this organization thriving over the years. And a big thank you to our national sponsors, as well as our chapter sponsors and partners. For those of you new to WEN, WEN is an international organization with 20 chapters across the US and Mexico. And we'll be opening chapters throughout the US and launching a chapter in Canada soon. We have over 6,000 members, and of those 6,000, about 2,000 are here in Houston. Our mission is to develop unique programming that provides networking opportunities and fosters career and leadership development to women who work in the energy value chain. And now, to capitalize on those networking opportunities, we're going to launch into our first set of breakout rooms. We'll be in these breakout rooms for about 10 to 15 minutes. You'll be given a 1-minute warning, then you'll be automatically brought back into this main session at the end of that time. We strongly recommend turning on your cameras during the breakout sessions to create more of an organic conversation. In your breakout rooms, please go ahead and introduce yourselves, get to know your small group, and talk about what is your experience or exposure to the PCEQ. So Arlene, if you'll go ahead and launch our breakout rooms. Perfect. You should be seeing a prompt to join on your screen now. 1944 treaty between Mexico and the U.S. relating to the Colorado River, the Tijuana River, and the Rio Grande. Commissioner Lindley is also involved in the agency's request for delegation from the EPA to issue permits for discharge of produced water, hydrostatic test water, and gas plant effluent into water in the state resulting from certain oil and gas activities under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program. And she interacts with the energy sector to create awareness of TCEQ permitting regulations. Before she was named commissioner, Emily served as the chief of staff for EPA Region 6, and prior to serving at EPA, she worked for over 10 years at TCEQ, serving in a variety of roles and interacting with staff at all levels. Commissioner Lindley is a member of the Austin's Women's Symphony League, the Baylor Women's League of Austin, and is a weekly driver for Meals on Wheels. Commissioner Lindley received a Bachelor of Arts from Baylor University and completed the Governor's Executive Development Program at the University of Texas at Austin LBJ School of Public Affairs in 2016. With that, I'll pass it over to Commissioner Lindley to take it away.
Good morning. Thanks, Sabrina, for that introduction, and thanks to everybody for tuning in and spending your lunch hour with me. I have a long list of things to talk about, and I know I won't get to probably all the topics a lot of folks would love to hear about. I'm very fascinated by the Women's Energy Network. I heard about this group for the first time I think it was about 2 years ago, and I actually joined. So I am also a member of WEN. I'm a member of the South Texas chapter, which is based in San Antonio, but it's the closest one to Austin that I know of, at least. So it's good to be with my fellow women in energy. So I'm going to first let Morgan Johnson pop on the screen, possibly, and introduce herself. Morgan is someone I could not do my job without, and she's my senior advisor. Morgan, if you're there, hop on. If she was having technical difficulties a second ago, so if she's not able to, we'll move forward and I'll let her introduce herself later on. But
I'm here. Good morning.
Okay.
I'm Commissioner Lindley, Senior Counsel, which she'll kind of get into what her day-to-day job is in a little bit for those that aren't that familiar with the agency. But just for a little plug of mine, I was previously at a law firm before I joined Commissioner Lindley's team. The background in water, political subdivision issues, and legislative matters. And I would just put this out to all of you that are on the call. Something that you can take home with you back to the office is the idea of, like, if you have any questions about the agency, please don't ever hesitate to give me a call. I am there to basically serve as an intermediary between Commissioner Lindley and the public. There are some things she cannot hear about, which is why I prefer people to call me first. But there are some things she can talk about. But so that being said, we are a very open agency that is obviously public focused. And so I'll put in the chat my email and my cell phone. So if you ever need anything, if you have a permit before the agency, have an application, want to deal with the rulemaking, please just feel free to give me a call. And 9 times out of 10, I can always get you where you need to go or point you at least in the right direction. So with that said, I'll hand it over back to the commissioner.
And I would just say, if you tune out to everything else today, take down Morgan's contact information, because we're a really large agency, and if you've never interacted with us or you just don't know how to, Morgan can help you. And so she's sharing her contact information for a reason. So let her be a resource for you if you ever need it. So I guess, Sabrina, if you'll go to the next slide. I'm not going to read it out loud, but that is our agency's mission statement, which maybe you've seen before, maybe you haven't. It reads pretty simply. It sounds pretty easy, but I can assure you it can be a lot more challenging than it sounds. So let me talk briefly about the history of the agency for those that aren't familiar with TCEQ. And that does stand for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We are the regulatory environmental agency for the state. We've been around for a very long time. Our history, natural resource programs date back to the early 20th century. That's when they were kind of established in Texas. Initially, these programs were motivated by concerns over the management of water resources and water rights. Water rights is a whole different interesting topic, which I didn't plan on talking about today, but if you want me to, I can talk about what water rights are and what that means. Around the same time, in parallel developments that were happening around the rest of the nation, really, things happening at the federal level, the state natural resource efforts broadened. And around the turn of the mid-century, the protection of air and water resources, and later the regulation of hazardous and non-hazardous waste began to kind of pick up more steam and get more attention. And so during the early 90s, the Texas legislature established one agency to kind of to house all the natural resource programs, basically consolidating a number of agencies. And at the time, we were called the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission. And that happened in 1993. And so we became this comprehensive environmental protection agency. Then in 2001, we were renamed to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the TCEQ for short. And so I will pause there and go with the first poll question. So I don't know, do the answer, okay.
Yes, so at this time you should see a polling prompt coming up onto your screen, so go ahead and vote. Yes, perfect, we already see about 8 of you, 9 of you, perfect. The numbers are flying up that people are voting. All right, we have almost 90% have voted already. We'll give everyone just a couple more seconds.
Sounds good. I'm not voting, so I'm going to be one of the people that doesn't show up.
Perfect, no problem.
There we go, right. There we go. And there's our results. B was the winner. So Sabrina, if you'll jump to the next slide, it's our org. And I apologize, I've got about this is 1 or 2 slides that are kind of difficult to see. So the correct answer is actually C. We have, to be exact, 2,829 employees. So we're large. We're pretty darn big. And so real quick, I'll walk through the org chart. As you can see at the very, very top of our agency is Governor Abbott. Governor Abbott appoints us 3 commissioners. I'm one of 3. He also names the chairman. And we have 4 different divisions that report to the commissioners directly. And then if you go down, you see our executive director, 3 offices that branch off and report to him directly. And then if you go further down, you see 6 different divisions. And in those 6 divisions is where the bulk of our employees lie. So we have our Office of Administrative Services, Office of Compliance and Enforcement, Legal Services, Air, Water, and Waste. Under our Office of Compliance and Enforcement, you'll see the last 4 boxes say field operations, and it names different areas of the state. That is where a lot of our employees, not the bulk, but a lot of our employees are, and those are scattered throughout the state. We have our central office in Austin, but we have 16 regional offices all over the state. And in those 4 areas, those field operations, that's where our field offices are located. That accounts for about 800 of our employees. I think most of y'all are in or around Houston. Houston is our largest regional office. We have, I want to say almost 200 employees just in Houston. So if you're not familiar with our regional office and you want to be, I encourage you to reach out to them. They love to have relationships with the industry they regulate. It makes your job and it makes our job a lot easier when we know what's going on at your site, and if there's anything going on that we need to touch base about, it's much easier to have a phone number of someone you can call and get in touch with that person. So let me speak briefly about the role of the commissioners versus the role of the executive director. We're set up in a very interesting way. So the commissioners, like I said, were appointed, and we are appointed to 6-year terms we have to go through a confirmation process with the Texas Senate. So not as dramatic usually, but what you see similar happening in Congress with those members of whether it's the president's cabinet or just anyone getting an appointed position is what we have to do as well. It's just at the state level. Thank goodness it's only at the state level. So, we go in front of a committee, we testify, the Senate votes on us, and if we get confirmed, then we get to stay in our jobs, or have a job, I should say. We can't serve more than 2 6-year terms, so we are limited in that way, and our terms are staggered so that every 2 years there's a new one of the commissioners' terms expires. So we are full-time positions as commissioners. There are hundreds, I don't know if there are thousands, but there are hundreds of appointed positions all over the state. Some of you might be appointed to something or have been appointed to something. There's a commission or a board for just about everything in this state. The interesting thing is I think someone told me once it's under 40 full-time appointed positions in the state. So, we're 3 of those 30 some odd full-time positions that are appointed. Most members or most people that are part of a board or commission just, serve and attend board meetings or whatever they might do here and there. But we are full-time in the office working. So let me see. I think, let me talk a little bit about our roles, commissioners. I'll do that next. So our job is very interesting. And I will tell you, I worked at the agency for a long time. I didn't fully appreciate everything that happens that the commissioners have to deal with until I stepped into that role, which is probably how a lot of y'all are in your jobs. Until you're the one doing it, you don't maybe fully comprehend or understand what's going to be on your plate. So our job is to establish overall agency direction and policy. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. And then we make final determinations on contested matters, whether that's a permit that's being contested or an enforcement action that's being contested. We do that by meeting every other Wednesday. And it is an open meeting, which means we have to follow the Open Meetings Procedures Act. And that's where we're able to get together and vote on things. So since there are 3 of us, anytime 2 or more are gathered, that's considered a quorum. And if there is a quorum established and we are discussing anything agency business related, we have to obey the Open Meetings Act, which means we have to follow posting guidelines for that meeting. And it has to be open to the public so that the public can participate and can attend. So it's kind of odd in this way, but the only interaction I can have with my 2 counterparts, Chairman Newman and Commissioner Janeka, are open to the public. So those are my 2 coworkers, and I can't ever run next door and say, hey, Chairman, what do you think about this issue? That would be breaking the law. So our discussions about work-related things are recorded and open to the public. And that's just kind of different. And I didn't fully appreciate that until I became a commissioner, that I can't pick my 2 coworkers' brains without the whole world knowing and seeing what I'm saying and what they're thinking and that kind of thing. And, for some people, that's just fine. For me personally, that can be intimidating, especially when I first came on. I'm more comfortable in the role now, just how probably a lot of us are. Once you do a job for a little while, you get more comfortable. But it's just kind of interesting that's the way we have to operate. So let me talk a little about the permitting process and when it's contested, because I mentioned we vote on contested matters. And that is probably the bulk of our work, that and working on rulemakings. So I don't know how many of you, this probably would have been a good poll question now that I think about it, but if you've ever heard the term ex parte communications, and if you might know what that means, but, and Morgan might have to chime in if I don't say this correctly, because this is a legal term and I am not an attorney, but an ex parte communication, let me say it that way, occurs when a party to a case or someone involved with a party talks or writes or in any way communicates directly with, usually it's in a courtroom, so usually with a judge, about an issue in the case without the other party's knowledge. Well, probably the easiest way to describe what we do is serve as judges a lot of the times. And so that's why you will hear, if you ever attend a commission agenda, which is what we call our open meetings where we take votes, you will hear us say over and over again, what's in the record, what's in the record, what's in the record. Because I can't have any kind of conversation or email or any kind of communication about a permit that might be coming from me, in front of me, that's contested. The only knowledge I can have about it is what's been legally provided in the record and in the backup documents for that matter. So when it comes before us, we don't have any kind of biases. We only have the legal reasons why this permit should be issued or should not be. Same thing for enforcement. So there's a lot of work that goes into contested matters, and it's very, very important to always have your comments on file, to have your voice heard, but have it heard in the record, because we can't have any kind of knowledge of anything if it's not in the record. That's how we base our decisions. So it's very, I'm not an attorney, but I think it's pretty similar to probably what happens in a courtroom. So that's Morgan, were you about to say something? Sorry.
No, I was gonna say that's correct.
Yeah.
When I kind of introduced myself, I said, if you have questions that likely Commissioner Lindley cannot hear, there are some caveats to that. But again, it's very much akin to, because the idea of ex parte derives from litigation. So it's the sense that she can only rely, just like a jury or a judge, she can only rely what's before her and what's been admitted before her, and admitted legally, versus someone that's seen something in the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I made the comment once that my childhood dream was to be a judge. And then I learned actually two things. I kind of developed a really small speech impediment, and saying the word judge didn't quite come out right. And so I thought, well, I can't be a judge if I can't say the word correctly. And then I learned that, I thought I had learned that you had to be an attorney in order to be a judge. And I thought, nope, I'm out. I don't want to go to law school. Anyway, so I just, sometimes God has a funny sense of humor, because now I kind of play judge somewhat at times. And, it's just funny how things end up the way they end up sometimes. So that is a quick description of kind of what we do as commissioners. It's a lot of reading, since we can't have conversations and communications about things that are coming before us a lot of times. It's a lot of reading what's in the record. And so that, I spend a lot of my time doing that. Let me talk a little about the ED, because if you notice on the org chart, most of the offices report to him directly, right? So our executive director serves as, the person running the agency day to day. By and large, most permits, most enforcement actions, most things we do are not contested. It's a very small number of things that are actually contested. Now, when they are contested, they can get pretty hairy, and those are the ones that we get to deal with. But the executive director, by and large, issues most of the permits and deals with most of the enforcement matters. And so they're running the agency operations day to day. They're dealing with the bulk of the agency, the workload, truly. And so we're kind of separated. There's kind of an executive director's side of the house, and there's kind of a commissioner's side of the house, because we have to be separated a little, right? Because we can't have these conversations about anything that could ever come in front of the commissioners. And so they're very, very busy. And I worked on the executive director's side of the house for, I think all but, I don't know, I've been at the agency about 10 years, and I think 7 of my years was on the executive director's side. So it was really fun to get to work in different areas there, and just see how things operate and see how things work. I could spend the entire time talking about how proud I am of our staff and how hard they work. I won't, but there's some brilliant people that work for the state and are very, very dedicated to taking care of the people and the water and the land and everything that we're responsible for taking care of. And so whether you've had much interaction with us or not, just rest assured that there are people working for the state that genuinely care about your well-being and about the well-being of everything around you. So With that, I think I'll jump to the next slide, a little more focused probably towards this group. So, by and large, I think most, I'm going to say oil and gas, but it's truly mostly the energy industry is familiar with the Railroad Commission, as they should be. They are primarily, they have jurisdiction over all the oil and gas activities, and that's great. Want that to stay over there. We don't need any more on our plate. But there are some ways that we interact with oil and gas and other energy related industries. The most basic explanation of how we probably interact with a lot of your companies or companies you either represent or consult with is that if you are emitting anything in the air, you probably need a permit from us in some way. It could be a standard permit. It could be a permit by rule. It could be a very technical permit that, could take a couple of years to get. But by and large, we regulate pretty much any and everything that gets emitted into the air. And so that's probably the main way most of y'all would interact with us. Something I've learned over the past couple of years is that we need to do a better job, we being the agency, of kind of building a bridge, just making ourselves known to the energy folks out there, because everyone is so familiar with the Railroad Commission, but you probably are regulated in some way by us. And so I've worked over the past year or so just trying to get the word out on who we are, on what we do, so that if you hear something you think, oh, yeah, we do that, I wonder if we need to be talking to the TCEQ, that you would pick up the phone and call us. If you can write down that website. If you ever go to our website, there's two easy ways to get to that website as well. I'm going to say it this way. If you put into Google TCEQ, we will come up. If you then are at our main page and you put oil and gas in our search box, it will take you to a page of where that link that's listed on this slide, it will go to that page. It will take you to a couple other pages that deal with topics related to oil and gas. We have had a number of workshops over the past, I would say, mostly focused over the past 2 years, but we're always doing workshops, but more tailored, more focused on oil and gas operations because, well, this past year aside, but before that, oil and gas was pretty darn busy, and a lot of things that we were seeing as far as emissions events and that kind of stuff were happening out in the Permian Basin. So put two and two together and realize it's probably oil and gas. And so we just realized we need to be communicating better, need to get ourselves out there so that industry knew who we were, knew what our role was, and make sure that everyone was in compliance. I like to stress that our biggest division is our Office of Compliance and Enforcement. And the first word is compliance. That's what we care the most about. If you aren't in compliance and you have a hard time getting into compliance, yeah, we go to enforcement, or you go to enforcement with us. And sometimes there can be a penalty involved. Sometimes it can be very costly. But that's never our goal, is to just slap a huge fine on someone. What we want is compliance. That's what we want. And so I just like to stress that message. But you'll see on the slide here, and if you ever go to the website, that link, that there's different things there. One I really want to highlight, well, two, is our small business and local government assistance section. We have a group of people there that you can call and speak to, and it's confidential, and whatever you say can't be used against you. So if you have a question saying, I think we might need a permit from y'all and we don't have one, they can talk you through how to go about getting one, and you not then go to enforcement because you are out of compliance. So it's a great resource. It's a toll-free number. It is, mostly small business and local governments focused, but that could be a lot of y'all. So they're very helpful people there. And if you are a very small business, there is a program within that section called an Environmentor. And actually, I would make the plug that if any of y'all would ever be interested in being an Environmentor, please hit Morgan or I up, because we would love to get y'all in touch with these folks. There are people all over the state that volunteer their time and their services to be an Environmentor, meaning that when someone calls, and it's usually a small town, to be very candid, it's a very small governmental entity that says, oh man, we don't know how to run our wastewater treatment plant, or we've had this landfill and we don't know what to do. We'll hook them up with an Environmentor, someone that's been in the industry for a long time, that just volunteers their time and truly serves as a mentor for that entity and kind of helps guide them through how to work at the TCEQ. It's almost like a consulting type thing, but they're environmentors. So it's a great program. And if you ever had an interest in volunteering in that way, would love to hear from you. And then lastly, that last bullet, if you go to the website, there's specific information about flaring and those 3 shales in the state. You can click on different links and see real-time data on the either air quality in those areas or what our stationary air monitors are finding. So it's pretty interesting, and I would just encourage you to spend a little time there if you're interested to see exactly what our role is with y'all and how we interplay with you, more than likely. So Sabrina, if you'll jump to the next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about some things going on more recently. I could talk a whole lot about the winter storm, but luckily it's past us. And our state agency, as well as a number of other state agencies, and very well could be a number of folks on this call, are probably in the middle of doing wrapping up maybe after action reports, which I know we're all familiar with how those work and what's involved in those. So our staff is, I think, getting pretty close to wrapping up that after action report. I believe our executive director is going to be presenting it at one of our open meetings, might even be next week, on kind of lessons learned, what went wrong, what went right. I'll explain a little bit about what our role was during that, because you might have heard about the TCEQ, but the focus was not the TCEQ, it was the Public Utility Commission, it was ERCOT. And so I just have some numbers I'll read off just so y'all get an idea of what we were dealing with. We logged over 16,000 hours for that event, and that's in about less than a month's time work. Something that most people don't realize, maybe a few people would, but right before the winter storm happened, the city of San Angelo, which is a pretty big population, started having water issues, and their whole city was without water. It's a lot of people, 100,000 people plus without water. That started, we were able to get, long story short, and quite honestly, I don't know all the details because I can't, because it might come before us one day, but a chemical from some entity leaked into the water system, and it's not a chemical you want people drinking. And so we got calls. I believe the city called us, or maybe we got complaints. Could have been a mixture of both. Initially saying something smells funny, something's not right. And so the city, to their credit, hopped on it pretty quick. We sent staff to that city, to San Angelo, and we're working day and night trying to figure out how to get the city's drinking water system back online. Because we had to shut it off, and then we had to, we do when that happens, which luckily is very rare. We figure out ways, what's the fastest way, how we can get the water tasted or cleaned or whatever might need to happen in order to get the city back on. Well, San Angelo was able to get different parts of the city back on, but there's still a part of San Angelo. Luckily, it's not a very big section that still can't drink from their taps and still can't use their water. So that was leading into the storm. So we were already pretty busy dealing with a pretty major crisis. The week coming out of the storm, so in the midst of when we actually got really busy with kind of our response and recovery efforts, there was a chemical plant fire, there was a train wreck, and there was a spill that happened across 3 different regions, our regions, how we break them up at the TCEQ. And so, so we had 16,000 hours logging, working on the storm, but then just those other things going on as well. And that's kind of how it is for the TCEQ. We're busy. There are 7,000 public water systems approximately in this state that we regulate. The data we had for the storm was the data we had. And what I mean when I say that is we only know things if people self-report it to us. So if a public water system called us and said, we're on a boil water notice, we would mark it down. If people didn't call and tell us, we might not necessarily know about all the issues that were happening. A lot of the issues that we saw were happening in high population areas, so our numbers were higher because those boil water notices were in the higher population areas. But just some very, I think, very interesting numbers is that we peaked at 1,985 systems on a boil water notice, which totaled 16.9 million Texans affected by that. So that's over half the state's population. So it's pretty significant. For comparison's sake, I think this is fascinating. You know, Harvey was kind of the benchmark for a lot of disaster response metrics for the state, for us as well. During Harvey, we had 200 boil water notices. And of course, those were mostly all coastal. During winter storm, you know, we had almost 2,000. So it was just a crazy time. We received, of course, you know, thousands. I know the one number was, I know it grew over this number, but at one point it was 4,000 emails that we needed to address just on boil water notices. We, in the matter of about 10 days, staff conducted 34 different engineering reviews. So, you know, plans and just looking at different water systems and these systems, which, you know, a city like Houston has a very, very large system, very complicated one. So doing an engineering review on that is intense, and we got them done all in about 2 weeks. So it was pretty crazy. That's just drinking water numbers. There are other numbers I could rattle off about wastewater treatment plants that were operable and inoperable. Then there were a number of other things that we regulate that were also hurting, I guess you could say, during that time. We had waste issues going on, you know, not something you would have heard a whole lot about, but we had to create a hotline for different waste questions that were coming up. I won't get too into this one because it can be kind of gross to think about and it's lunchtime. But, you know, there were significant losses to livestock, whether it's cows or chickens or whatever. And so there has to be a way to dispose of those. And so we had to work with a number of different entities on how to do that safely. Because when, you know, quantity can be a problem. And so anyway, we had to just work with different waste entities on how to, and local entities on how to take care of that issue. Waste trucks, this was kind of interesting. We're having a hard time getting gas. There's a lot of waste companies that have made the switch over to natural gas, and they weren't able to get natural gas because everyone was struggling to get natural gas. So, you know, but there's a whole lot of trash being accumulated and being generated. And so it needed to be picked up. And so there was just kind of this, oh, okay, we got to figure out how to help with that. We also had to quickly get outside and survey Superfund sites, which I don't know if that's a familiar term to a lot of y'all or not, but Superfund sites are, they're state sites and there's federal sites, and they're kind of the really gnarly, dirty sites out there, for lack of a more scientific term. They're dirty sites that need to get cleaned up and are in remediation. And so we need to get out there quickly and survey those and make sure nothing happened there, and that the people that live near them, if there are people who live near them, were still being protected, and if they have wells, that their wells were still safe, and a lot of stuff like that. Sure, y'all all know or are pretty familiar, there were a number of shutdowns at petrochemical facilities throughout the state. And some of the numbers we had were, let's see, I think this date is February 23rd. There were 82 shut down, which is a whole lot. There's a few that were mixed in there that were already shut down, maybe for maintenance or whatever, but most of those by and large were shut down because of the storm. Well, there were just a number of things that caused then for doing this, because it kind of reciprocated throughout the state. One thing I found really interesting that, you know, luckily we were able to step in and get in touch with the Texas Department of Emergency Management, because they were the ones really running all the storm recovery operations. But we started hearing from some of our public water systems saying, hey, we can't get some of the chemicals we need in order to run our drinking water plants, right? You need chemicals to treat the water to make it safe for people to drink. Well, those places where they get those chemicals, those facilities were shut down. And so can't lift the boil water notice if the water isn't clean enough, and if it doesn't test clean enough from the bacteria tests that have to be taken and samples. And so just kind of this weird, okay, we got to figure this out. We've got to get chlorine to public water systems. How are we going to get it if these plants aren't up and operating? And luckily, we were able to kind of smooth that out and work things out and get people off boil water notices quickly. But I will tell you, there were about 24 hours there where that was a stressful conversation of, we got to get people running water, but we don't have chemicals to get to them because those places aren't up and running because they don't have power. So, you know, things were getting complicated quickly. Luckily, that issue kind of seemed really big, and it was really big, but we were able to work it out pretty well with just different partners around the state. So that was very helpful. We also had to work with EPA to get a fuel waiver request. Some of y'all might be familiar with those. You know, you can only use certain fuels certain months of the year. And so we, as TCEQ, whenever we need a waiver, we're the ones that have to go, I shouldn't say have to, we're the ones that go ask EPA, can we get a waiver, you know, for a certain amount of time to let this other fuel be used during the months it's not supposed to be used. So anyway, just crazy things like that, you know, are all happening behind the scenes that I don't, you know, people don't need to know, right? That's just our job. That's just what we do. And that's how it should be. But just to give you all a small taste, I could keep talking about the storm, but I should probably move on. So to keep going through this chart, like I already mentioned, we've had a number of workshops more recently tailored for oil and gas. If you were to go to the oil and gas webpage or one of our web pages, you can go back and listen and go back and see some emissions workshops we've recently put on. We did a series of them kind of just in the fall. I think they might have started November, December, so they might have even wrapped up into 2021. Yeah, Morgan shaking her head. And they were very good. They were very helpful. If you need information or are curious, I would encourage you to take a look at those. We've also got some pretty big rule changes coming up. Fairly recently, some have already come up. Our penalty policy is a huge policy guidance document that the agency uses to base all of our enforcement actions on, basically. So there are statutory limits on how much we can penalize someone, a cash amount, basically. But there are things in the penalty policy that we can change without statutory changes. And so we took a big, long, hard look at our penalty policy. The executive director did, and presented a number of changes to the commissioners, and we adopted it. And that was a big undertaking. And just to be very candid, one of the reasons why we usually take a look at the penalty policy every 2 years. It would have been taken up right around the time Harvey came along, and so it got delayed. And then if you'll remember, kind of in 2019, I guess is when it mostly started. In fact, we probably just had a 2-year anniversary. There were some pretty significant, pretty big explosions, and usually along the Houston Ship Channel and or around Beaumont that got a lot of media attention, wrecked a lot of havoc in the ship channel, gave a lot of folks in the industry a bad reputation because, you know, whether they were the ones causing the explosion or not, you know, they're in the same business. And so anyway, we just had to deal with the events that were happening and look at, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough to make sure, is there anything we can do to prevent these type of things from happening? That's a tough question to answer. I'm not sure increasing the penalty is the way to always get there, but we did take a look at our penalty policy and found ways that we could tweak it and hopefully encourage more compliance with for entities so that maybe, just maybe, you know, people will watch themselves a little better and we won't have as many events, big or small. We also are looking at our compliance history, which is kind of the attorneys if there's attorneys on the call, they might be pretty interested in that one. I could talk a long time about it, but I don't think I will because it can be pretty in the weeds of things at our agency. If you are interested in that, I would encourage you to read up on what's happening. If you want any information, Morgan and I will get it to you. Rulemakings are actually something that commissioners can talk about. It doesn't fall into that ex parte category. So I always try to be very engaged and very interested in knowing what the public is thinking about some of the proposed rule changes we have coming up. But compliance history is pretty self-explanatory, right? If you have a permit from us, you have a score on what your compliance history is. And that score determines, you know, if you're satisfactory or unsatisfactory, that can then determine what your next permit from us might look like. So it's a pretty big deal. We are taking up, and I believe the comment period closes on the 26th. So very soon here, what public participation looks like moving forward for us. There's just a lot of things going on in the world, and we've had to do a deep dive to look at let me back up. We got a rule petition in November of 2019 saying, hey, TCEQ needs to require more of entities getting permits when it comes to posting them and printing them, the notices that go out on those permits in different languages, because not everyone speaks English. And we said, there's some truth to that. And we already had some rules in place about if you're posting for certain things, you need to, also have a Spanish translation. But there's some things that have come up that we realize we probably need to improve upon in that area so that public participation can be more thorough, so that it's more open to people that don't just speak English. And so we're working on that. It's very complicated, but a petition came to us saying, y'all need to look at this. And we said, okay, yeah, you're right. We'll take a look. And so we're in the middle of looking and updating those rules on public participation right now. I am very happy to report that in January, we did receive delegation of, we already have a Texas Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permitting program, which is a huge program. And we received delegation from EPA on that years and years ago. But the legislature directed us last session to go seek permit delegation to transfer the program from the Railroad Commission to TCEQ, and then to go seek program delegation from EPA for permits for the things listed there: produced water, hydrostatic test water, gas plant effluent. And so now, instead of going to the Railroad Commission for a permit, if you want to discharge any of those things into waters of the state, you come to the TCEQ. You also no longer have to go to EPA to get a permit. We are the permitting authority for those things. So instead of getting a state permit and a federal permit, you just get one permit, and it's from us. So getting a delegated program, getting authority from EPA is a massive undertaking. I mean, massive. Another thing I could talk a whole lot about. But anyway, just so y'all know, we are now the permitting authority at the state or federal level if you are wanting to discharge any of those items into waters of the state. So I think that covers it for this slide. So we can go on to the next.
Yeah, before we move on to the next one, those stats about Winter Storm Uri, so interesting. You don't realize some of the scale and the different systems that are getting impacted. You get very isolated to what's going on in your ecosystem, but there's a lot going on the grander scheme for the state.
It is pretty fascinating stuff. You're right.
And I just want to remind everyone, we do have the chat feature, so if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and log those in the chat, and we'll bring them to Commissioner Lindley.
Yeah, y'all feel free to chime in. I'm happy to discuss anything. I'm hitting on a whole lot of topics here, I know. So, and I know it is already 12:30, and I don't want to cut short the next networking session. So I'm going to run through these next two slides pretty darn quick, but again, they're fascinating topics that you might be familiar with, you might not have any idea about. But the Texas legislature is meeting right now, and we're obviously very busy whenever the legislature's in town, like any other state agency. Right now, our agency alone is tracking about 820 pieces of legislation. We are analyzing, well, you can see the numbers there, 562. We're watching, meaning we're not necessarily analyzing, we're just kind of seeing where they go just because they could potentially affect us. 258, and we've got about 275 staff that are daily working on those items. One of our newest commissioner, Commissioner Bobby Janeka, is going through his confirmation process right now, and he actually just had a hearing this week and went in front of the committee, and it went well. And so hopefully he gets in front of the full Senate for a vote soon, and he is fully confirmed. If, one thing about confirmation for us, if we don't get confirmed by the Senate, then as soon as session ends, so, basically June 1, we don't have a job. So it's very important to get confirmed, because I think Bobby would like to keep his job. I know I like mine. We do have a number of things we've gone to the legislature and asked money for. Two top things are salary increases for a number of our employees. And we're asking for more employees to run what we call our Texas Optimization Program, the TOPS, how it's listed there. These are the people that when a water system goes down, like what was happening in San Angelo, or the people that are reviewing a bunch of the boil water notices, very, very technical positions. Most of them are engineers. We're seeking 5 more employees in order to run that program because we're just finding more and more that water systems need help, and we have to send staff out to those facilities and help them, which we're happy to do, but we don't have many employees that do that work. So we're asking for more because they're just water issues that spring up all the time, and we have a very large state. The salary increases we're asking for are for our investigators, so those people that are out in the field, for our enforcement coordinators, for our engineers, for our permit specialists, and for our attorneys. That's where we're seeking raises for. We have found that, we can't compete with industry salaries, but we have found that we are even losing out to either local governments or other state agencies when it comes to paying our people. And so we don't want to lose out to governments, our other governments anymore if we can. We'd like to keep our employees, and retention's hard in some of those areas. So we're trying to get a little more money to pay those people a little more in hopes that they'll stick around the agency a little longer. The committees we mostly report to, you can see right there, both the House and the Senate. I know, gosh, just yesterday we had 4 different committees that we had hearings that we had to have staff at. So we can get spread thin during session, but that's okay. That's part of it. And I will stop there because I think the next poll question is up.
Before we get to the full question, we have a question on how is the emphasis on renewable energy influencing the TCEQ policies?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the legislature, quite frankly. So, we do set overall policy and that kind of thing, but we're limited on what the legislature gives us authority to set policy on, if that makes sense. So there are boundaries that we have to stay within. I know there are a number of bills right now focused on getting more infrastructure built up across the state for, say, electric vehicles. And if that bill were to pass, then the agency would be very involved in working on that. So a lot of that policy stuff is going to come from the legislature. And so we'll see what bills pass and then what either rulemakings we have to do in order to make sure our permits allow that kind of stuff or what. But yeah, I think that'll be a really good question that I would probably have a much better answer for here in probably about 2 months, once we actually see what bills pass and what the legislature deems, that we need to be now regulating or how we need to be regulating it. So we'll see. Obviously renewables, they're just coming more and more online, and that's a great thing. We're very lucky that we live in a state with a lot of diversity when it comes to how we get our energy. And my big thing, and I think my counterparts would probably say the same thing, is that we never want to be, I don't ever want us to limit technology, right? I want to make sure new technologies are coming out all the time, and I want to make sure we're not a hindrance in order to using those new technologies that might help improve things around the state. But we need to make sure they're operating correctly and operating in a way that isn't then causing an issue somewhere else, right? We have a program, I'm not sure if many of y'all are familiar with it, called the Texas Emissions Reduction Program, TERP, T-E-R-P for short. It is we could talk a lot about TERP. I would encourage you to maybe Google it. It's the program was established, years and years ago, maybe 2 decades ago, in order to reduce emissions around the state. And how that happens is it's basically a ginormous grant program, and we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that the agency gets every year. And we then have different grant programs, and we have ones for electric vehicles. We have one for replacing school buses that need to be replaced because, school buses, there's a lot of them running all the time, and they're usually at peak ozone hours, and they're emitting things. And so we'd like to get the dirty ones off the road, because every kind of emission that we can, whether it's off the road or out of the ship channel or wherever it might be, that we can reduce is a good thing. And so we have different grant programs that people come in and ask money for, like, hey, we want to replace all of our engines in our fleet to go to natural gas or to maybe go to electric. Natural gas is the big one. and they can seek grant funding from us. And so those programs also get tweaked by the legislature usually every session. We'll see if there's a new program or two that gets developed that then there's going to be, you know, millions of dollars that go to that someone can come seek a grant for. But it's a highly interesting program. It's been very effective over the years as far as helping reducing emissions. They are focused on non-attainment areas across the state because that's where we need to do the most work as far as reducing our emissions. But that program serves the people of Texas, I would argue. I know that sounds cheesy, but a great deal, just because it does put so much money towards reducing emissions and just improving air quality all around the state. And, you know, it's one of the programs that both industry and environmental groups usually get behind, which is always really nice to see, because everyone's come to the table and said, okay, how do we do better? And the CHIRP program was established in order to kind of help us get there. So anyway, sorry, I know I talked a lot. We can do the poll question.
Perfect.
Sabrina, honestly, if you want to break and go to the networking, I'm fine with that too. I've only got a few more slides, but.
No, I think we can keep going. We can shorten the networking session or just go right into Q&A. I think this is awesome information that you're sharing. So thank you for being so open and educating us on what's happening at the TCEQ.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our next question is more about the audience's engagement with a piece of legislation historically. Got a lot of quick voters, which is fantastic. So we're at roughly 80% already. I'll give everyone just a couple more seconds to submit their answers. But it seems like the vast majority of us are at never. And there's a few people who have a little bit of exposure, and then even fewer that have every time they're working on it.
Yeah. Well, not surprising. If you'll jump to the next slide, it's this is probably the second slide that I apologize for. It's a little fuzzy. This was the best one, Morgan, I could find. There's a lot of other flow charts out there that have a lot more words on them and are much more detailed, but this is by and large probably the simplest explanation I've seen posted on a flow chart on how a bill becomes a law. There are a number of things within each box that also happen that isn't described on this chart, but can take a lot of time. And, you know, like I said, legislature meets every other year, odd number of years, for 140 days. And the only thing they have to get done is the budget. That is mandated in the Texas Constitution. Everything else after that just kind of happens if it happens. And so this session's been interesting. The winter storm that affected all of us has taken over a lot of the topics, probably has been the leading topic for session that, you know, obviously wasn't planned. Probably wouldn't have been one of the top hot topics had it not happened. So a lot of other things that might have been really big issues are just no longer big issues. And maybe they'll come back up next session. But anyway, I'm not going to read through all that, but as you can kind of see, it kind of bills start in either chamber, the House or the Senate, and they go through their process and then they swap. And if they can swap and both get voted on in the opposite chamber, then they can eventually be made into a law, which it is way more complicated than that. But that's kind of the simplest explanation. And where we are right now in session, everything is based on a calendar. And so things have to be set on certain calendars with so many days heads up notice. And every bill has to go through what they call first, second, and third reading. And things will get posted on a calendar. And they might not get to everything on that calendar that day. And so then it might get bumped to the next day. And eventually the list of things that are supposed to get heard will get so long that there are literally not enough hours in the day. I mean, they'll go till midnight. And then that day is done. And whatever didn't get heard just dies. And that's kind of how legislation dies. And there are thousands of bills filed every year. And then a lot of them die. The bulk of them die because you just run out of time on a calendar. I saw that chat kind of briefly pop up. If that didn't answer your question, Hopefully Morgan got an answer, but if not, we can. The legislative session is pretty fascinating and it's really interesting. And there are actually a lot of experts that could probably just tell y'all some really fascinating behind the scenes details and how things work. So if you ever want to hear from a speaker like that, I'm happy to get you in touch with people. I can come back a different day and talk about it because it's a pretty fascinating and fast and furious time right now in the legislature. I'm going to pivot and talk really, really quickly because I'm just really proud of it, of what our agency has done really since probably summer of last year. We decided to take a deep dive into looking at different diversity and inclusion issues. So Sabrina, if you'll jump to slide 14, it's pretty quick. You can see right there kind of how we fall as far as male versus female, and our directors and managers and team leaders are kind of our management positions. That's how they're labeled for us. If you'll jump to slide 15, I think it's 15, the next one, you can kind of see a breakdown that staff did. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory, staffing by TCEQ offices compared to the state labor force and kind of where we fall on our minority comparisons by office. Obviously, we have work to do. Whole state does, I would argue. But that's what we're working on right now. One of our deputy directors, L'Oreal Stepney, actually, I would put in a plug for her. If you ever want an incredible speaker, she would be amazing. She will blow your mind. She is wildly impressive. But if you'll jump to the next slide, she has kind of taken the reins for the executive director on this effort. It involves way more than one person, but she's kind of the ringleader for putting together kind of a plan on what we need to be doing better and what we could be doing better as far as working on our diversity and inclusion issues. And so she did this, I say she, the whole agency was involved with this diversity data analysis. They presented to the commissioners last fall. Very, very interesting. They've developed a customized leadership development course, which I've gone through one round of it. I think I have my next course training next week. It's very interesting. I mean, I don't know how many of y'all gotten to participate in any kind of unconscious bias trainings, but it's very interesting, very enlightening. We have a program, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more on my last slide, which will be the next slide, the Mickey Lelandship program. I'll talk about that a little bit more. We started doing these, what we call coffee with exec. And so I think we had about 11 of them, and we never had more than 10 people, but it was whoever in the agency wanted to sit down with the agency leadership and talk about diversity and inclusion could come along. And we had no agenda, and it was just 1 hour to talk about how you felt, how things were going. And they were fascinating experiences. I got to participate again, because us commissioners can't be two or more can't be gathered at once. We had to kind of split them up. So I only got to attend, I think 3 or 4 of the 10 or 11, but it was wonderful just to hear from staff, just to say, I've been here 10 years. I've struggled with this issue, or I started 2 months ago and I've loved how included I felt. And anyway, it was wonderful. We are upping our game. We've always done it, but we're upping our game on trying to do recruiting at universities where we know there's higher minority populations. We have started an Envision series, which I want to plug. If you go to our website, it's on our main page. Sometimes the screen scrolls, but it'll be one of the 4 screens there about these videos we're doing, highlighting just a number of cool things. There's also virtual field trip videos we're doing. We're trying to get those in front of younger children, just basically saying, hey, I'm an aquatic scientist. Here's what I do for the state. And just opening their eyes and getting them curious and trying to do it at a young age, just trying to educate children in elementary school, really saying, here's what you can do if you for the state one day, if you're interested in water, if you're interested in meteorology, if you're interested in a number of things. So pretty proud of those videos and how they're working their way through different ISDs right now. We've also started a diversity mentoring program, which I'm getting to be a part of. So is Morgan. It's really cool. It's just getting started right now. And then we've been trying to do virtual social lunches. Just anyone that wants to hop on a Zoom lunch every Friday, just because we don't get to see each other in person. And we've heard from a lot of staff that that's tough. I used to see my coworkers, know what's going on in their lives, that kind of thing. So we're trying to just open up the door to say, hey, employees, get together, talk, because we know you miss that aspect of work. Okay, so my last slide, if you'll jump to it, is I want to highlight and plug our Mickey Leland internship program. Oh, thank you. Let me do that.
So like first we have a polling question. So Arlene, this is our last one.
It is, yes.
This should be a quick one. You have two options. Have you heard of it or are you a part of it? So we'll give everyone just a couple of seconds here. We'll turn it back over to you for the last slide or two, and then we will open it up for Q&A. I think we'll go ahead and forgo the second networking session, so don't feel rushed here. But please, everyone, feel free to start submitting those questions in the chat so that we can get into the Q&A section. All right, so we have a majority of voters here, so a lot of people haven't heard of it, so please tell us what it is.
Well, great. And I did see that one chat popped up from Ms. Schultz, I think. I am glad there are a few that have heard of it. So, the name of the speaker, her name is L'Oreal Stepney, Stepney, and it's L'Oreal, like the makeup brand, L'Oreal. She'll probably kill me for doing that. She's very introverted, but she is wildly impressive. I can't say enough good things about her. There we go. Okay, so last but certainly not least, I want to mention our Mickey Leland Environmental Internship Program. This program has been around since 1992. It carries the name of a former congressman, Mickey Leland. The group of candidates that we get every year is, I just can't brag about them. I mean, I don't get to see all their resumes because there's, over 500 of them, but they're really, really impressive group of college kids and, undergrad and graduate. So what it is a summer internship program. There might be opportunities to do a fall and spring. I'm not sure on that, but I know it's mostly summer. What we do is we sponsor about 100 interns. The agency has about 100 interns every summer. And then we ask industries or anyone out there really if they would also like to sponsor one. What that means for you is you do pay for it. It is a paid internship, and that's the hitch. So that's where a lot of people kind of go, oh, we'd love to have an intern, but we don't want to pay. Well, we need you to pay. That's the promise that we make to these kids, that it is a paid internship. Right now, we have between our agency and the sponsors we have, I think we're able to place around, last year was kind of a different year, but I think in previous years it had been over 100, maybe about 130 or so different interns. So, we have over 500 applications and we only have spots for about 130. So the people that get interns are usually blown away by these interns because they've gotten the cream of the crop, right? It's a very competitive process. What the agency does is oversees the internship program. So we take the applications of all the kids. We also take your application if you want to sponsor. We do all the screening. We pair you up, make sure you'd be okay with that intern. So you don't have to go through all kind of the work. You basically just get this very impressive intern at the end of the day that you do need to pay. But we do all the work as far as finding them, getting them to you, and that kind of stuff. So really, to be very candid, other than cutting a check, it's not really much work for you. And you get an awesome intern out of it. We have had interns at the agency that have then gone on to do very impressive things at our agency, sometimes run the place. We have the few folks I've spoken to industry-wise that have sponsored an intern before, almost all of them have said they tried to hire them later because they were so impressed by the work they did and the knowledge these kids had and their passion for it. And so I would just encourage you, if your company has a way to sponsor, there is opportunities for you to sponsor, and we still have time for you to do that as well. If you go to the website there, we actually just got word, I think it was yesterday. Usually the deadline would have already passed, but kind of winter storm kind of delayed a lot of things. And so the deadline to still sponsor is open. And I think it's open for a little bit longer, not a whole lot longer. It's coming up here pretty quick. And I had that date in front of me. Now I don't remember it, but anyway, it's coming up quick. So go to the website if you think you might be interested in sponsoring. And these kids come from, right there it says across the nation. I know we've had international students before. I mean, it really is mind-blowing, the number of impressive applications we get from students that want to be involved in the environmental world. And it's lawyers, it's kids studying engineering, it's geologists, it's everything. And so anyway, that's my subtle plug that if your company could or would be interested in sponsoring, we'd love to help get you a summer intern that will blow your mind. So I will stop there. I know there's a few minutes left, so I'm happy to, yeah.
Yes, okay, perfect. So we're starting to get some questions in here. Where do you see regulations going in the next 5 years based on the public and current federal administration's perceptions of the oil industry?
That's a great question. It's a very interesting one. I think, federally, that's going to set the tone for a lot of things, I think. I do not know the new EPA administrator. I've never met him. Sounds like a very impressive gentleman. And, he got a whole lot of votes, more votes than I think an administrator had in a long time. So a lot of people in the Senate supported him, in the U.S. Senate. I know coming from North Carolina, he's very interested. He's made it pretty known. Two of the big topics for him are environmental justice, which is a huge topic, and I think will be a very big topic over the next couple of years, and also the topic of PFAS, which I don't know how many of y'all heard that or familiar. Deals with emerging contaminants in drinking water, and that is something I personally find very fascinating. And I'm very, very interested to see where the regulations go on that. But as far as at the state level, I'm not sure regulations are going to change a whole lot. And honestly, just my personal opinion is because I think the legislature right now is just focused on other things. They're focused so much on the winter storm, and I'm not sure how much that will translate to changing any regulatory things for oil and gas specifically. Might and might not. We'll just have to wait and see, which, session only goes for another month and a half or maybe 5 weeks. So we'll know soon. There's so much, I'll jump to that question here in a second. There's a lot of talk about renewables and, we'll see. Right now it's a whole lot of talk. I mean, changes, haven't been made at a federal or state level. And I think some will come down the pike, how significant they'll be is always what's to be determined. I mean, we can talk a whole lot about things, but when pen comes to paper and you actually see the regulations that come out, it'll just be interesting to see if it was really a significant change or not. Might very well be, but right now immediately. And when I say immediately, in my mind, that means, a year or two. I think it'll take at least a year or two for any kind of major changes to come that might affect oil and gas. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, there was a question about the TIPS program. Short answer is no. What we did was program transferred from railroad to us. Then we went and sought federal delegation. And what we did was basically adopt all the federal statutes that already exist and said, those federal statutes that already exist that you already had to abide by, that's what you're going to have to abide by if you want to get a permit from us. There is something kind of interesting going on this session. There's a senator from the Lubbock area, and there's a House member as well. So there's two people carrying this bill. So that already increases the likelihood that it'll pass. But they want to form a consortium that would be housed at Texas Tech, studying produced water. And I find that very interesting. I think it's a good idea to study it because there's a lot of questions about it. I'll just put it that way. And so if that bill passes, we would obviously be, one of the members of this consortium. There'd also be, public, private, other probably institutions involved. And so, I don't know what exactly they'll all be studying yet, but I would not be I don't know. I shouldn't say that I wouldn't be surprised if it passes because you just never know what's going to happen in the Texas legislature, but it seems to have enough momentum and seems to be pretty non-controversial that maybe it will pass, but a consortium will be developed in-house at Texas Tech and they'll kind of run the study on that. And so I say all that, if there were to be something that came out in the study, maybe that could affect eventually the permitting side of the house or the permitting side of things. And And we would be the ones that would need to either update our permits or tweak them or something. So right now, the permit you already went for, whether it was at the Railroad Commission, well, Railroad Commission and EPA will be very, very similar to what you, our permit requirements are the same right now. So that's probably the best answer I can give you right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for being transparent and open with us here and sharing a bit about what's happening at the commission and some of your story if I've gone here. So definitely very grateful for your time today and for you agreeing to come and speak with us. So before we wrap up skipping that one, before we wrap up today's programming, I'd like to share a few upcoming events to keep everyone informed and aware of WEN's offerings. We have upcoming virtual luncheons, just like we had here today. So we'll kick them off with a networking session and hear from a fantastic speaker. We are so excited about the lineup that we have planned for this year. So we hope to see you all at future events. And the next slide we have is that Commissioner Lindley has kindly provided some additional recommendations to help us to continue to develop and thrive during these uncertain times. So we will be sending out this slide to all of you who tuned in today shortly after we conclude, so you can take a moment to read through. But Commissioner Lindley has a super impressive story, and we really appreciate her sharing these insights and recommendations with us. So
I just want to say thank you all so much for listening to me go on and on. I would love to just get to know this group better. I feel like I could learn so much from your membership, because I know there's a lot of things that we probably would all love to talk about that we didn't even get close to talking to you about today. So I know I could learn a whole lot from you all. So please don't be a stranger. And I would like to say happy Earth Day Eve. Tomorrow is Earth Day. So
I love that. Yeah,
with this group during this week. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Tomorrow's already April 22nd, maybe the better way to say that.
Yes. How is this happening? Time's flying by. Fantastic. So the last thing I'll remind you is to please update your online WEN profile so that you can receive any new information that we have upcoming. Being connected is so critical in this digital environment, and we would love to make sure that you have the latest information from us. So that brings us to a close for today's luncheon. One last thank you to Commissioner Lindley, and thank you to all of you who tuned in. We hope you stay safe and that hopefully we can see each other in person again very soon.